Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at a very interesting game that I just recently had the pleasure of checking out thanks to the developers Ratloop Games Canada and publisher Frontier Foundry. A couple weeks ago, I was invited to an event where I had a chance to play Lemnis Gate, the upcoming strategy shooter blend whose very name is a clever bit of wordplay for the developers over at Ratloop Games. When the game was first announced, I was intrigued by the concept, unsure of how it would play, but after spending a few hours with it, I can see exactly what they're going for, and I am super excited to share this extremely fresh take on blending the genres. There have been many attempts at this blend, but none have quite taken this approach. So, without further ado, let's dive on in to Lemnis Gate. The gameplay loop. While we'll discuss the game modes and characters and the finer details later in this video, I want to start off by explaining the gameplay loop itself, a phrase I'm using quite literally here. At its most basic, no matter which mode you play, a game of Lemnis Gate might seem simple enough, but things get pretty wild pretty fast. Each game has two halves, and each half has multiple turns that last 25 seconds each, representing the same 25 seconds in universe that you'll be playing over and over again each half, something I'll explain in just a moment. Now, like many turn-based games, Lemnis Gate uses an I go, you go system, so one player plays their turn first, and then the second plays theirs, and then it's back to player one, and the back and forth continues until all the turns in the half are played. Each half has a winner, and then there's an overall winner for the game as a whole, too. At the start of each turn, the player whose turn it is chooses one character from a selection of 7. You can only use a character once per half, so you need to be picky based on their weapon loadout, special abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. With a character picked, the player plays their 25-second turn. Now, playing the turn itself is where things start to get funky. To make this as simple as possible to understand, imagine a 1v1 game. Player 1 chooses their first character. Let's call him A. A is able to run around for the full 25 seconds freely. There is nobody else on the map. They're able to accomplish objectives, run in circles, do whatever they want in that 25 seconds. During this turn, though, player 2 is watching. And when their turn comes, they pick their first character. Let's call them B, and they dive in. Now they're going to play the same 25 seconds, and I mean the exact same 25 seconds. A is going to be replaying the same moves that they just did, while B is being controlled by player 2. B can be used to kill A, B can be used to accomplish their own objectives, but whatever B does, player 1 is observing. When it's player 1's turn again, they select their second character, C. Now when C starts their 25 seconds, A is on the map doing what A did, and B is on the map doing what B did, and the player is controlling C to make moves accordingly. This goes back and forth as each player adds more and more characters over that same 25-second time period, accomplishing and preventing the accomplishing of objectives, killing and preventing the killing of characters in order to do so. You see, drawn rather crudely here, if a character pulls something off in their turn, but is killed before they can pull it off in a later turn, they aren't able to pull it off in subsequent turns anymore, because they're dead before they can do so. Whatever they managed to do in prior turns no longer matters if they die before they manage to do them in the latest turn. The only way to make sure they're still able to pull it off would be to, in an even later turn, kill their killer before the killing happens. After all the turns in a half are done, only the final turns and results matter. So this is the dance you dance in Lemnis Gate. Watching the events unfold over the 25 seconds, picking a character, diving in to overwrite those 25 seconds with new events in your favor. And as the 25-second loop is built, things get more and more complicated, with either player trying to outwit and outmaneuver the other, not just in the ways of your typical shooter, but also from a strategic perspective, not just spatially, but temporally as well. You have to think 4 moves ahead. This is chess, with guns and rocket launchers. Now, it's a difficult thing to explain, and if I've been unclear, please don't hesitate to ask questions in the comments down below. I will happily answer any question you have about the gameplay loop because it is so interesting. And it's so intuitive when you play it, but I find explaining it to somebody, takes a couple goes. And I don't want to belabor it in the video in case I have been clear, but if I haven't, please ask away, because I would love to make sure everyone who's watching understands what's going on, because it is that awesome. I had so much fun with this game, but more on my opinion and experience later, close to the end of the video. But please, again, don't hesitate to ask. Now, this core concept and gameplay loop really quickly just gets absolutely ridiculous as you find yourself spending more and more time anticipating your opponent's moves rather than simply playing in the moment itself. By way of example, here you can see my opponent, H for Havoc, another excellent YouTuber you should check out. He's covering this game as well. He's being quite clever over here in grabbing one of the objectives, but he wasn't quite clever enough to hide himself from a potential sniper. So, I go in as the sniper and drop his character before he's able to return the objective to base. Feeling pretty good about denying the point. However, I wasn't clever enough to keep my sniper well hidden on the lead up to the killing shot, and so he came in with his sniper in a later turn and killed my sniper before my sniper killed his character carrying the objective, and ultimately he was able to not only acquire that very point, but also deny me one in the same round with his sniper, forcing a draw where there would have otherwise been a 2-0 win for me. Or take, for example, this round here, where we were playing 2v2s, and on our side, we had to destroy these objectives, while the other had to defend them. I managed to destroy mine, and my teammate his, but for good measure, I went over to his objective and added a few extra shots into it, even though it was already destroyed. Now, I wasn't really accomplishing anything, shooting into an already destroyed objective. But, in the following round, when our opponents were playing and defending, they managed to kill my teammate's character before he destroyed his objective, but they weren't able to kill my character as I went over to said objective and started firing at it. All those useless shots from the first turn? Well, they were now quite useful in destroying the objective. By thinking ahead and anticipating what our opponents might do, I was able to ensure both objectives remained destroyed. Ultimately, though, the end result of each individual turn doesn't matter. The end result of the whole half does. As another example, take a look at this moment here where I'm watching our opponents move. Over the course of multiple turns, they end up congregating at one location at one moment in time. So for the next turn, I go in with the rocket launcher and proximity mine, wait for that moment and place in time, and kill them all while keeping myself decently protected. Their dead characters no longer make a difference in future turns, and try as they might, they're not able to kill my rocket launcher before that fateful rocket is launched because I kept myself safe from potential future attempts. I'll have plenty more examples at the end of this video because honestly, I could talk about this stuff for hours on end. It was absolutely exhilarating to play, and I'm not using that word lightly. I don't just throw the word exhilarating around. My heart was racing, and whether I was winning or losing, I was having a great time, blown away by how my opponent managed to outplay me with an ace in the hole, or pleased at myself for coming up with an unexpected approach. The gameplay loop in Lemnis Gate is absolutely brilliant. I've never played anything like it, and I cannot wait to dive back in. But let's set that aside and take a look at some of the finer details now. The characters. There are 7 characters to choose from, with 1 you can use per turn. With a total of 5 turns per round, that means you have some wiggle room on who to leave out based on your overall strategy and what your opponent's been doing. Each of these characters has their own specialization, with a weapon and a special ability that runs on a cooldown timer, and they felt varied enough that they were all worth using under certain circumstances. I didn't feel like any particular character was a dud, per se, but the most kind of standard, basic character would have to be Capitan. With her auto rifle and frag grenade, she's sort of your standard run-and-gun character, but a well-placed or well-timed grenade can obviously put a lot of work in with its area of effect damage output. There's nothing like throwing a grenade to stop a future enemy from using a particular, door or something for fear of the timing on the grenade, right? Toxin is immediately more interesting, using a very short-range weapon whose rounds are heavily affected by gravity, but he's also able to teleport as far as he's able to shoot his teleportation device. While he's somewhat slow overall to just walk around, the teleportation means he's able to cover great distances in the blink of an eye, though he does have to wait for the cooldown between each use, of course. It's a great tool for cutting the enemy off or otherwise surprising them, and he's able to ignore traditional avenues of movement with the help of teleportation. Rush is also a quick character, but his speed is still reliant on physical movement from point to point. His base speed is quite high, and his special ability allows him to dash over a short distance. It doesn't cause all that much damage per shot, I found, but zipping around and firing short bursts does the job, and it does make him hard to hit, even when you've already seen where he's going. Striker is a sniper who is also able to slow time down as their special. I think the uses there are self-explanatory, allowing you to nail shots that you otherwise never would be able to. In 2v2s, it's actually interesting to note that the slow-mo applies not just to the sniper, but to their teammate as well when playing a specific game mode, and I'll get into that in a bit. Now, Deathblow is a slow mover with a rocket launcher and proximity mines he can toss as well. AoE all over the place, slow rate of fire, but devastating with a good shot. Vendetta wields a shotgun, and her special allows her to deploy turrets. They are rapid-fire turrets, but their DPS seems to be on the low side at a quick glance, so they seem to be more for suppression rather than killing, though they will cause chip damage to an unaware enemy character, and they will be able to finish off a character who has already taken damage previously. Put enough of them over the same region, though, and you have a formidable wall made of turrets. Carl, the last of the 7, is able to fire a beam that does very low damage but is quite accurate, and his special allows him to plant a protection orb, either on the ground or on a character. I found him more useful for his special than his damage output by a long shot. He was able to completely change the course of an engagement by simply adding a defensive orb into the equation, either preventing the death of a character entirely or just allowing them to live long enough to accomplish a crucial objective. As you can see, the character variety here is quite decent. You've got area control between frags, rockets, and proximity mines, mobility between teleportation and high-speed movement, support at close and long range with shotguns, turrets, accurate beam weapons, and shields, and you've got a sniper. I'd be curious to see if more characters will get added down the line, and it'll be interesting to see the meta develop over time and how it shifts with updates as well. There's also clearly a progression system, one at a player level and one at a per character level. The kind of unlocks are not something we were able to see, but it begs the questions. Will there be different types of specials, like say a smoke grenade rather than a frag grenade for Capitan? Different weapons with different pros and cons, perhaps? Different buffs and debuffs to help personalize the characters at various, sort of pro-con, cost-benefit analysis. Time will tell. And it'll be interesting to see how neglected or less often used characters for one player might be somewhat different from the same character who has been leveled up by another player. Character variety and archetypes can make or break a shooter like this, so it's good to see Lemnis Gate trying something interesting with almost all of their 7. Again, Capitan is a little bit on the basic side, but I suppose you need one who's a bit more kind of simple to help with like tutorials and things like that. And I just hope that there is long-term support planned for Lemnis Gate, because it'll be really cool to see new characters get added in. It'd be really cool to see how they would change the gameplay experience entirely. So I hope they're up to something. But for starters, the initial 7 are all really fun to play with, and the number of strategies we're coming up with, just, with a couple of hours in the game, is already very exciting. So it's cool to see. It's quite cool to see. And these interesting experiments don't just stop here with the characters. The game modes. There were 2 game modes that we were able to play at this event, with the team-based mode having one further subdivision, and there was a third mode we weren't able to play outside of the tutorial. This mode that we didn't get to play was Domination, and it involved shooting an objective until it became your team's color, with the other team able to neutralize or capture it for themselves by shooting at it as well. The team with the most of these objectives under their control at the end of the half wins the half, but playing once against some bots wasn't entirely indicative of the experience, so let's talk about some more concrete experiences instead, the 2 modes that we could play. Both of the modes were objective-based, but the winner of either half, and ultimately the game as a whole, was determined not just by accomplishing the objective, but by kill counts as well, something that was particularly important when none of the objectives were met in the final turn. Now, the first of the 2 modes was Retrieve XM, and we only got to play as a 1v1 setup, and it involved capturing little orbs of exotic material, called XM, and returning them to your base where you spawn. On the level we played, there were 4 of these orbs, but you could only carry one at a time, needing to return the first to your base before being able to pick up a second. which meant you were relying on multiple turns to pick up multiple XM orbs. Either half had players switching which side they started on and who went first, but otherwise played pretty similarly, and the time shenanigans could be used to get to an orb before the enemy, kill the enemy before they grabbed an orb to begin with, or to kill an enemy after they grabbed an orb, but before they were able to return it to base. That would allow you to, perhaps pick it up for yourself from where it was dropped and take it back to your own base instead. With the action focused around these pickups, you know where the enemy has to be for at least a moment in time, and you can try to develop entire strategies around that foresight. Or you can work using hindsight instead, only acting to prevent the enemy characters that you know will accomplish the objectives because they did so in a prior turn. The second of the two game modes we got to play was Seek and Destroy, and this was played as 2v2s in two different formats, showing two different ways in which team play can work. The first was with alternating individual turns. Red team player 1, blue team player 1, red team player 2, blue team player 2. The back and forth built a lot of tension each turn, as the opening act became a simple 1v1 of sorts that could quickly devolve into chaos in later turns. The other way involved both players from each team playing simultaneously for their respective turns. So both players on red team go at the same time, and then both players on blue team go at the same time. This latter approach opened the door to new potential strategies and how abilities could be used together. For example, as mentioned earlier, the sniper is able to slow down time for a short duration as their special ability. But when they do so in this mode, time slows down for the teammate as well. Finding interesting synergies in this mode will be an interesting thing to see. But that's me just describing how turns are taken. The overall mode itself is also a bit more fluid, at least in my opinion. The two teams are divided into attacker and defender, switching sides at the half, with the attacker needing to destroy at least one of two objectives, called resistors, and the defender needing to, you guessed it, prevent said destruction. Though the targets were static, forcing players into certain zones if they wanted to destroy them, the player never had to be at one extremely specific location like in the previous mode. This meant that the turns were a little less predictable, with players being granted some freedom in their angles of attack. Not to say that one mode was better than the other, but the two modes felt different, which is of course important, and the two different types of 2v2 added another layer of variance as well. I'd actually like to see a third type of 2v2 setup, where one player from each side plays at the same time, but maybe that's too chaotic. I don't know, maybe it doesn't work, maybe they tested it, but just throwing it out there, it'd be kind of fun to see, what kind of chaos that devolves into. Now, there's no word, as far as I know at least, about more game modes at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised to see more get added down the line. With the time-bending aspect of it, a lot of traditional game modes might not work as fluidly or as interestingly as the three we were able to see at this current event. But I would love to see this level of creativity get flexed even further. The devs are they're showing some serious promise on this. My thoughts and gameplay footage. So please keep in mind that this is way too early to properly review the game, and these impressions are literally from just a couple of hours of playing the game, so do take my opinion with a grain of salt. With that said, let me summarize it like this really quickly. If Christopher Nolan made video games, he'd make this kind of video game. Honestly, Lemnis Gate has really blown me away, even with just the thin vertical slice that was shown off at this event. I was intrigued by the time-bending concept when I first saw the game announced, and in this relatively untapped hybrid genre, we've seen more failures than successes, at least in my personal opinion, so I was very skeptical going in. So when I got invited to try the game out, I was excited to finally sit down and, see how it actually works with my own eyes and hands, I guess. And hot damn, man, it feels great. Everything that sounds even remotely confusing in how the game works is actually super intuitive. So I hope I've been able to explain it clearly. Once you get the hang of it, the gameplay loops, both literal and metaphorical, are ridiculously fun. Coming up with new strats is a big part of what made our short time with the game most exhilarating. At least I would say so. So it'll be interesting to see what the longevity of that actually is. Will new characters and maps and items and balance changes completely shift the meta around from time to time, or will there be these go-to strats within days of release with no need for anybody to ever shift from them? That's obviously hard to say at this junction, but what I can say is that in its current form, I had a great time, observing my opponent's moves, thinking about the selection of characters I had on hand, and wondering, Not just how to counter it, but if I should counter it just quite yet. H for Havoc and I went toe-to-toe on some 1v1s where he absolutely pummeled me. See, I'm not the best with a sniper, but turns out he's pretty damn good. So he would just wait until his later turns, pull out the sniper, killing all my important characters before they were able to accomplish anything. The one time I saved my sniper to try and counter-snipe him, well, like I said, I'm not that great with a sniper. But that's not saying being good with a sniper is the be-all and end-all. You know, you need situational awareness to remember where to look and when you should look there to make sure you're actually getting your shots in. And it also puts the onus on the opponent, in this case me, to set up redundancies or to block off ideal snipers' nests early on. A few well-placed turrets might have eliminated his advantage entirely, but coming up with counters to possible future moves in an unfamiliar game in the heat of the moment held me back. And who knows, if I put those turrets down too early, maybe he'd use a turn to just destroy them all before his sniper got into position. It's impossible to predict, but I think what matters most is I still had fun, and I'm still thinking about the turns. Like, I didn't mind the defeats, because they were the result of stuff I just never seen before. It's an experience I hadn't had before, at all. Now, obviously, I enjoyed the victories more. There's nothing quite like seeing exactly where your enemy is going to be, picking the appropriate character for the job, and then executing a plan to perfection in a way that catches your opponent off guard. Again, the required level of foresight from both sides of the field is where a lot of the fun lay for me, as did the need to sort of remember what came before you. In one particular instance, I was firing around seemingly at random. Except it wasn't entirely at random. I had an idea of where my opponents might move because of where they needed to go. I kept in mind what angles they might come from, what doors they might use, if they're likely to jump or shoot back, etc., and I fired in those general directions. And what do you know, if you look at this corner over here, you'll see those random shots actually net me some extra kills, not just in this turn you're seeing right now, but in future turns as well. So evidently, I can see things before they happen sometimes. Another fun moment was when one of my key early characters got absolutely murdered on the way to pick up the objective in later turns. So, in one of my own later turns, I used my character to plant a shield on that first character. This kept him alive for long enough to pick up the objective and return to base with it, rather than dropping dead. Unfortunately, my counter got countered at an even later turn, which meant it was all for naught. And there was one particularly hilarious moment where my opponent forgot where they fired a missile at one point, and so they jumped in the way of their own missile in a future turn, causing a team kill and a suicide all in one motion. Whether I was playing 1v1 or 2v2, my heart was constantly racing. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I was just non-stop blown away by the fun I was having. The characters were all fun. Again, Capitan is a little bit on the basic side, but you got 7 to pick from, you got 5 turns. The Capitan has her uses as well. But overall, they were mostly fun. The rest of them were great. You gotta have a simple character, right? But the game modes were just interesting in their own ways as well. But I think what's key above it all, the core concept is just so fantastically executed. If you're familiar with the channel, you will often hear me say, stop releasing the same game. I want to see new ideas, new IPs, new concepts. Like, I'm always on about that, and it's always exciting to see developers try new things. This is it. This is the kind of stuff I'm asking for. Even talking about it right now just gets me so excited to just sit down with the game again. I'll be keeping my eye on Lemnis Gate and covering it extensively on the lead up to launch and after, so if you want to keep up with all of that, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel and let me know down below. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, or anything to say, go ahead and drop a comment. I read them all, and I'll try and answer any questions that I can, now or in future coverage. Again, just, man, this game's a lot of fun. Now, don't hesitate to join our Discord too if you're looking for folks to play the game with. Link to that will be in the description down below. And as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.